Hello everyone, welcome back to my class. Today we are going to learn about the living world. In today's class, we'll learn about like what are living organisms or what is living, what is the definition of that, like the characters which are uh, characterized or exhibited by living organism that we'll study. Then we'll go for the nomenclature, how the nomenclature is given to all the living organisms, and what are the different types of taxonomic categories. And then we'll again at the last we'll deal with the taxonomical aids that are nothing but herbarium, botanical gardens, museums, zoological parks, etc. All this we'll discuss along with the parameters of living organisms based on NCRT. We are talking about the parameters of living. The parameters of living can be studied by comparing with the non-living. This is according to the NCRT. We can say that there are two fundamental parameters. Like first one is defining parameters and then fundamental parameters. When the living organisms, in all the living organisms, they'll be particularly defined. They'll be having no exceptions when we are defining the living organisms. Like example, we can say all the living organisms exhibit the characters like growth, reproduction, ability, response, or self-replication, metabolism, etc. They all are like exhibited by all the living organisms which are defining. They'll be having no exceptions. When we are talking about the fundamental parameters, they may have few exceptions in the living organisms. Like example, when we are talking about the plants, okay, they are considered as the living organisms, but some exceptions like plants do not move, right? And there are certain more exceptions, like in plant category when we are talking, then the some plants are green and some are non-green. So fundamental parameters may have exceptions when we are talking about the living organisms, whereas defining parameters, they will have no exceptions. Now let us move on to the parameters or one by one about the characters that are exhibited by the living organisms. The first one is growth. Growth is nothing but it's an irreversible change in all the living organisms. When we are talking about the growth, the finest example for that one is it is nothing but it is an increase in the size, volume, surface area, etc. That is what we are telling that the growth is. That is increase in mass and number of individuals. We call it as growth, right? That is the growth is nothing but increase in size. In each and every individual organism in the living organisms, we see that there is a continuous growth. There is a continuous growth which is very active in the all the living organisms. So growth is an irreversible change and nothing but the increase in size, volume, surface area, etc. In case of animals, the growth is seen up to a certain age. That means in all the animals, growth will occur up to a particular maturity age, or we can say certain age. Whereas in case of plants, the growth is continuous throughout their life. Right. Now there are two major twin components, or we can say the factors that are giving out the definition for the growth, that is increase in mass and increase in number, right? Increase in mass and increase in number. When we are talking about the unicellular and multicellular organisms, then we say that multicellular organisms grow by cell division. Multicellular organisms, they will grow by cell division, which involves n number of cells. When we are talking about the unicellular organisms, they also grow by the cell division, but the involvement is only one cell which are easily observable under microscope, right? Now when we are talking about the growth is of two different types. Now growth is of two different types. The first one is intrinsic growth and the second one is extrinsic growth. Intrinsic and extrinsic growth. Intrinsic in the sense it is the internal growth, the growth which is taking place inside the body of an organism, that we are calling as intrinsic growth. We can see only in case of living organisms. Clear? Extrinsic growth means the external growth, like the growth which we are seeing in case of non-living things. Now there is a question arises here, like do non-living things grow? Right? Grow, yes, because growth is a fundamental feature. Growth overall will show a fundamental feature in, like as just now I said, growth is increase in size. We can increase the size of any non-living thing, increase in volume, increase in surface area. The general definition for the growth is the increase in size. When we are talking about only the living organisms, then the growth here is intrinsic. That is growth which is inside and can be seen only in case of living organisms. right? External is extrinsic, which we can see in case of mountains, right, or boulders or sand mounds. All of them will increase in body mass, but the growth is exhibited by the accumulation of materials. All will be accumulating the materials here, and then they will increase in size, they will increase their number, but they will not be living. That kind of growth we are calling it as extrinsic growth. Now what is the fundamental, like that is which is showing the exceptions here? That is in case of plants and animals. Plants show the growth by cell division that occur throughout their lifespan, but in case of animals the growth is seen only up to a certain age, right? This was the first one. Let us move on to the second one, that is reproduction. As you all know, the reproduction, nothing but the production of progeny, or that is a processing that features more or less than those of parents, right? And this can be seen in case of multicellular organisms. Clear? Right. Now we'll talk about the both the different types of reproduction. There are two different types. That is, first one is sexual, and the second one asexual reproduction. Clear? Now, sexual reproduction involves uni or biparental, means it can be seen in case of single-celled organisms, or in case two different parents are also involved in the sexual reproduction. In this case, the genetic variation is seen. When the progeny is formed, that means the offsprings will be different. Genetic variation is seen. Like example, you can say one human is different to the other human. They are not clones, they are not similar. That's what we're calling it as genetic variation is seen in all the progeny. Similar we can say, but they will not be identical. And also it's a complex and also involved and elaborative process in case of sexual reproduction. We come to the second one, that is asexual reproduction, wherein only single parent is involved here. That's why we call it as uniparental. Uni means single, and only one parent is involved here in case of asexual reproduction. So when there is only one parent involved here, then will be no genetic variation that is seen. That means all the progeny will be identical. We can say that here the clones are formed. Identical copies of all the progeny of all the parents will be formed here. And hence it's only one parent involved. So it's a easy and a simple process. Right? So there are different types of asexual reproduction that we'll discuss one by one. Then when we are talking about the sexual, then the steps which are involved in the sexual reproduction are like gamete formation, okay, which we tell pre-fertilization, which is the first step. Second one is the fertilization. And the last, that is the post-fertilization, where you can find the formation of zygote. These are the steps that are involved in the sexual reproduction, and hence because of these complex steps, this process we call it as elaborative process, or we can say it's a complex process than compared to the asexual reproduction. Now, asexual reproduction is again of different types, where we'll study the first one is the binary fission, right? Binary fission, in this one, we can see that there will be an equal division of cytoplasm. That means the cytoplasm divides equally such that it will lose the parental identity. Here, it will lose the parental identity. We cannot identify between the parent and the offsprings, right? That much identical features we can find in case in the both the parent as well as in the offsprings. Now, when we are talking, these are again of three different types: simple, longitudinal, and transfer. Like in case of simple, example, amoeba. Amoeba which will not have particular shape, that again will give rise to the two identical daughter cells. This is what we are seeing in case of amoeba. Okay, that is simple. It can have any fission which doesn't have any particular longitudinal or transverse fission. In case of longitudinal fission, the fission or the division of cytoplasm will take longitudinally like this. Then it will go on by forming a division in the center. Okay, by forming a division here in the center, forming two identical daughter cells. Okay. Longitudinal division you can find in case of euglena. Cytoplasm will divide longitudinally into equal and then similar daughter cells can be seen. Whereas in case of transverse, which we also called as oblique, that can be seen in case of diatoms or in case of paramecium also, and then dinoflagellates. Like when we are talking about the dinoflagellates, then we can see that there will be transverse like this. Transverse division that is taking place, which will give rise to the two identical organisms or the offsprings. Two identical offsprings you can find in case of transverse binary fission. Next one is budding. Now, where budding, you can find examples like yeast and hydra. The division here, the cytoplasm will divide unequally. Okay, that means unequal division of cytoplasm means it will not lose its parental identity, wherein the parent and the offspring, both of them will be different. We can easily identify between the parent and the offsprings. Like here you can see in case of this one, like how the organism is dividing. First it will form a bud shape structure, then again the nucleus is also dividing, and then cell cytoplasm also dividing, where you can find at the last the parent cell and the bud. Easily you can identify between both the organisms. Unequal division of cytoplasm will take place, hence the parental identity is not lost. Is the fragmentation. Fragmentation can be seen mostly in case of filamentous organisms, like in case of Spirogyra, where the organism looks like a filament. Now here the organism will divide and will form into two identical offsprings. Like examples you can find in case of Spirogyra, right, and also Eulothrix. Okay, this was the fragmentation, and the last one we have is regeneration. Regeneration is nothing but it's a modified fragmentation. What is it? Regeneration is nothing but it's a modified fragmentation. This can be seen in case of the organisms like planaria. We can see in case of planaria where the organism will cut into or divided into a fully fleshed organisms. We are cutting the organisms here and here. Okay, once we are cutting here, this organism will form into a fully developed organism. If we are cutting the organism into three parts, then three different planarias can be formed. That means regeneration of the rest of the body parts, and then the organism is divided into a fully fledged organisms. All the copies will be the exact copy cells which are formed from the parent cells. It is a modified form of fragmentation. In the fragmentation, we have seen that the filamentous organism is forming into two different fragments. But here, once the organism is cut, then again it will develop into a fully fledged organism. Right? I hope it is clear. Like, the reproduction has got fewer exceptions. Like example, when we are talking about the exceptions like worker bees, mules, and infertile humans, they do not reproduce. That is the female worker bee. That will be sterile because of lack of nutrition. And the mules are nothing but that's a cross between the donkey and horse. So that's why they'll not be able to reproduce. And infertile humans, they're also unable to reproduce due to the genetic factors. And hence we can say that reproduction is a fundamental feature but not a defining feature. Right? Reproduction is a fundamental feature which wherein the all of the organisms they cannot reproduce. In certain cases, there are some exceptions here. I hope it's clear. So when we compare both the growth and reproduction, we can say that growth and reproduction are different in unicellular and in multicellular organisms. When we are talking about the unicellular organisms, both growth and reproduction are same. That means they cannot be defined. What is growth and what is reproduction in case of unicellular organisms? They are same. That means they are mutually inclusive events. That means growth is equal to reproduction. They are mutually inclusive events. Whereas in case of multicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive events. Clear? That means they are totally different phenomena. Two different phenomena are occurring in case of multicellular organisms. That means we can say that there are two parameters, growth and reproduction, that are two different phenomena in the living organisms when we are comparing the unicellular and multicellular organisms. Right. The next feature here for the living organism is metabolism, which will carry out in all the living organisms. Right. When we are talking about the metabolism, now all the reactions that are taking place in the cell, we call that as metabolism. Okay, like our body has interactions of metabolic reactions. All the living organisms are made up of chemicals, right? Our body has on all the living organisms, you can find that the metabolism is going to take place. Now this is of again two types: anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism means nothing but the synthesis, where all the cells are combined together, and then that is anabolism. Catabolism means the breakdown of molecules, which by different chemical reactions, which we are calling it as catabolism. Now, here the metabolism is, there is no exception. In all the living organisms, it is carried out, there is no exception. Hence, we can say that metabolism is a defining feature. Metabolism is a defining feature in all the living organisms. Now, what is the minimum requirement that is required for the cell? For a cell to carry out the metabolism, the minimum requirement is the cellular organization is needed. How in a case of multicellular organisms, all the cells will have the cellular organization. Now, this cellular organization is nothing but the defining feature. This cellular organization, which is carrying out all the metabolic reactions, is nothing but the defining feature in all the living organisms. Right, right, are made up of chemicals. They are all made up of chemicals. These chemicals, they will change continuously to biomolecules. They will change continuously to biomolecules, and hence when these conversions are taking place from the chemicals to biomolecules, we are calling it as, okay, we are calling it as chemical reactions or metabolic reactions. And the whole process of these reactions, which are carried out by the chemicals, we call that as metabolism, which are n numbers, thousands in numbers in case of living organisms. Right. Hence, we can say that this cellular organization of the body is the defining feature of all the living forms. The next one comes here is the consciousness. When we are talking about the living organisms, all the living organisms are conscious. And this feature or this parameter is a defining feature in all the living organisms, because in the non-living organisms it is absent. When we are, because response to stimulus is seen only in case of living organisms, but not in case of non-living. So it is the most obvious, and technically we can say that it is a complicated feature, wherein we can see only in case of living. Like, one question arises here when we are talking about the livings, like what about the patients that are in coma? They are living or dead? We can say they are neither living nor dead. Right, they are neither living nor dead, because their brain is dead but their body is living. Right. So here when we are talking about the living organisms, they are all the living organisms self conscious? No. Then if I can say that they are self conscious, are all the living organisms are, okay, self conscious, then I can say no. Why? Because the ability to sense their surrounding and also in the environment, and to respond to the environmental stimuli, which could be physical, chemical, or biological. Now, what is the ability to respond to? They can be physical, okay, it can be chemical, or it can be biological also. Now, this response to the environmental stimuli, we call that as irritability. Now, this response we calling it as irritability, which is seen in case of animals. It is very quick response, but whereas in case of plants it is very slow response. And hence we say that the response to stimulus or the self consciousness in all the living organism is not the same. When we are talking about the animals, it is very fast, immediately they'll respond. Whereas in case of plants, either it is physical stimuli or a physical, chemical or biological, that will be very slow in case of the plants. Right. Now, when we are talking about the special features in all the living organisms, that is nothing but the self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is the defining feature of only the humans. The self-awareness is the defining features which can be seen only in case of humans. Right. Like just now I given the example in case of response or the consciousness, patients who are in coma are not self-aware, but the cells are very conscious, but the body is not conscious. Like I given, the patients are in coma, whether they are living or dead, their self-awareness, they are not self-aware. When the living organisms are there, they are self-aware, but the patients who are in coma, they are not self-aware, but their cells are very conscious and the body is also conscious. Therefore, we can say that humans, we sense through our sense organs. That's what we can say, that this is the special features in case of humans. Whereas in case of plants, okay, they do not respond to any external features like water, temperature, or other pollutants or other organisms. They will not respond to the other external factors. Whereas humans, they have a special tendency to respond to all these characters, to these factors. So we can say that all the living organisms or all the living phenomena are due to the underlying interactions. Now, what are those underlying interactions here? Like how all the multicellular organisms are made up of cells, right? Cells are again made up of tissues. Cells will form the tissues. Tissues together will form the organs. Okay, then organs will form the total organ system. This organ system will form together the organism. Right, all the living phenomena are due to this underlying interaction. Now, the function of a cell is due to underlying. We are made because of multiple organ system interactions, multiple organ systems interactions. Like all living beings are self-replicating. That means they are making continuously, they are reproducing or interactive. They are interacting to the environment and also to the involving systems. Therefore, we say that the humans, we share the common genetic material, but to varying degrees. Means we all will have the same genetic material, but they all will be to a different degrees. I hope it's clear. By this, we finish off with the fundamental parameters of all the living organisms. Now, next, we'll move on to the taxonomic categories.